All right, good morning. You guys awake yet? All right, same answer as the first session. Good deal. So this next session, we're going to talk about data visualization with Nagios. Since we are going to look at some visualization tools, it might be advantageous if you want to move to the front half of the room. It might be a little more interesting since you can actually be able to see the screen better. It's up to you, but I would encourage you to be in the front half of the room so you can actually see a little bit better for the screen. So as long as we're not packed out. First thing I want to just look at is, why would we use data visualization for those of us who are system admins and who are doing monitoring? Some of the biggest reasons is that data visualizations, it turns raw data into useful information. Data by itself can be in pretty huge quantities. Just looking at lots and lots of status information and things like that, it's very, very useful day to day, but on a bigger picture and on a bigger scale, by itself sometimes it's not very, very useful information. And so sometimes we need a visualization to be able to just take our understanding of what's going on to the next level. Data visualization, it can communicate complex ideas and information in an understandable format for maybe non-technical users or people who aren't necessarily familiar with everything that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And this is a big one I hear too quite a bit, is that it can communicate technical information to a non-technical user. Something I hear from a lot of people is they need to be able to show the management who are not technical what's going on and what's happening with their data, and you need some sort of a visualization tool to do that. And I think Jeff Sly, who gave a presentation yesterday, he kind of nailed it on the head. He said, if you're going to sell something to your management, it has to look pretty. And I've heard that time and time again. We had some guys come into the office. They just wanted to pick our brains for about 2 hours. It was sometime last year, and they came in and they were talking, and they said their management, they were willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a visualization tool where all it was a globe that spun and just had a little blinking dot for a host, whether it was green for good, red for bad, and that's all it did. And they were literally spending over $100,000 a year just for this single add-on. That was yes, exactly, and this was And these are the managers. They just thought it was the coolest thing ever. They loved it. They were willing to spend just crazy amounts of money on it because they thought it was super, super cool. Now, from an IT perspective, a blinking dot on a globe really is not especially helpful. It's like, okay, I know the continent where something's broken. That's great. But on a day-to-day level, that doesn't really help you all that much from the technical standpoint. It doesn't help you pin it down. But that just illustrates the point. If you have a visualization, you can really sell something to your management. And I know sometimes that's a struggle, say, with Nagios core users, is that it doesn't by itself, it's extremely useful from a monitoring perspective, but sometimes it doesn't look pretty enough to be able to sell to the management. So some of what I'm going to cover in this presentation is just some different tools that are out there that you guys may or may not know about. I'm not actually going to talk about PNP or Nagios Graph because I generally assume probably 90 to 95% of people are already using it, one of those two. It's from most people that I talk to, those are pretty standard tools just for performance graphing. It's a common tool that's out there, so I'm not actually going to cover that in this presentation. Before I go any farther, too, I also want to mention I want this to be somewhat interactive as well, so I want you guys to feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me, because I'd like to have this be a little more discussion-oriented than just me talking at you guys for 40 minutes. So, especially since we all probably had a fun night last night, and so we're all probably dragging a little bit this morning. So, figure if it's a little more discussion-based, we'll all stay a little more awake this morning. So, just moving on. One thing, too, as I've talked to other people with larger environments, as your environment gets larger, data visualization becomes more and more important just because the scale of the data, you can't view 50,000 things in a table. It's not practical. It doesn't give you useful information. I was talking with a guy last night who had just an enormous amount of services that he was monitoring, and he wasn't actually using the Nagios Core GUI at all to view his information. He was literally just using it just for the monitoring and then literally just sending all the data up a larger up a level to basically have it all aggregated and turned into a visualization, because that's the only way they were able to effectively view their data, is in some sort of visualization tool instead of just a table, because they just had too much information. And so it's just important to aggregate data into some sort of visual tool. So another handy tool of data visualization is sometimes it can very, very clearly reveal where a problem is, where simply the raw data itself cannot do. My favorite classic example of this, and several of us have probably experienced this, I'm going to use the example of the cable company conversation. How many of us here have had this conversation with the cable company? Hey, my internet's garbage. What can we do about it? And of course, you get level 1 help desk support, and they're like, oh, I can ping you. Looks fine to me. And you're like, no, that's not going to work. You know, us being Nagios users, that's just not acceptable. It's not okay. So what do we inherently do? And say, okay, well, we set up Nagios monitoring and so forth. And this is a true story. I've done this literally more than once. My family's got a cabin up in northern Minnesota. We were literally losing internet connection between like 7 and 9 a.m. in the morning and 7 and 9 p.m. every night, basically when everybody else was using internet. We like pretty much lost all connectivity. And you know, call the cable company, and we get the guy on the phone. He's like, yeah, I can ping it just fine. Maybe it's your computer, maybe it's your router, all that stuff. And I'm just like, no, it's not. But thanks anyway. So you know, I set up monitoring on it for about a week, and then basically, you know, call back a few days later, and talk to the guy and say, here, why don't you take a look at this? This is the, and of course, you know, I blurred it out so they wouldn't name any names for companies, but this was the actual DNS name of the IP address that it was resolving to. That's all blurred out up there. And I said, okay, this is the packet loss to my IP address being monitored externally for like the last 5 days. Notice that several times throughout the day it's at 100%. Does this look fine to you? And of course, the results. Sudden flurry of activity, ports are being replaced, there's a technician out there, 2 or 3 days later, suddenly there's drastic improvement. Literally, I've done this more than once where, you know, somebody's saying, oh yeah, I don't see any problem, I can get through to it just fine, because at that moment, you know, yes, it is working, but reliability is down. And visualization, it's really hard to argue with this and say, does this look reliable to you? You know, and can't really argue with that. And so that to me, it's like, that's why I love visualizations. It's like, you know, it can clearly point out where there's a problem. Okay, these times a day, you got a problem going on here. Something's happening. What can you guys do about it? And it's pretty clear, and you get action taken out of it, which is ultimately what we want. And you know, it's a great trick if, you know, your internet at your house ever goes out and the cable company's not wanting to do something about it for you. So. All right, so the first visualization tool I want to point out to you guys, a lot of you guys might be familiar with this one already, but I do want to go over with it with you guys just because I think it's a really powerful tool, and there's a lot of things that can be done with it. It's called NagViz, and this is a community project, and so it's totally free, and a couple things that are pretty cool about it. It's a long-standing project. It's been around for a while. It's well maintained. There's some level of community support. There is a forum for it and so forth, but see a lot of updates for it. And for those of you using broker modules like NDO Utils, Merlin, MK Live, it will interface with pretty much any of the common broker modules that you might have for your backend data. And it gives you live status information on some sort of map or visualization. This is just an auto map. This is the most basic tool that it auto generates this for you based on your parent and child relationships with your hosts. This might actually be an older version. I think the newer version has it looking a little nicer than this. I went for screenshots for some of these because live demos can sometimes turn out interesting and break. So, and some of these maps can take quite a while to set up. So I wanted to just show you the potential for this particular project. Now you'll notice this is a great way to diagram your network topology, but also the green check marks throughout it are actual live status information that's being